The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, welcome to the SPCC webinar. This is Joy Barnes, and I've got with me Rob Resch. We make up the Environmental Services Department here at DEKRA Inside, or also known as RCI Safety. Just a couple things before we get started. I want to let you know that everyone is in attendance is muted. However, we do want to encourage you to ask questions, and if you can submit them in the little question bar that's in the window that shows up in the webinar meeting, is usually to your right there. There's a question bar where you can submit questions. We'll answer your questions throughout the webinar. So feel free to submit questions as we go through the SPCC webinar. This webinar is designed to be more of an introductory course to SPCC, the SPCC rule, kind of bring you up to date on its history, some of the changes over the course of the past few years and where EPA is going with their enforcement of it, and also what DEKRA Insight can provide as solutions to addressing your SPCC needs. With that, I do want to say that since you can't, this is a webinar and you can't see us, I just want you to picture us as George Clooney and Brad Pitt in Ocean's 11. Since I'm the taller of the two, I'm George Clooney and Rob is Brad Pitt. That gives you kind of a mental image, you know, of who's presenting the webinar. The SPCC rules have been around for quite a while. The original Oil Pollution Act was put into effect back in 1974. It was one part of the original EPA when it was created. And the intent basically was to protect navigable waters and from oil spills and oil pollution. If you want to look the rule up, the citation of the rule is 40 CFR Part 112. It went through a major revision in 2002, and that's really when RCI Safety got involved in writing SPCC rules for our clients. So we've been writing rules now, or excuse me, writing plans now for the better part of 16 years. Together between Rob and I, we've probably got 30 years or more than 30 years of combined experience in SPCC rules. There have been numerous minor revisions since the 2002 revision, but again, they're just the EPA trying to clean up little discrepancies in the rule. One of the first questions that we're always asked is how do I know if the SPCC rule applies to me? So we start with this little paragraph here, and the rule applies to non-transportation related facilities. So if you're a truck on the road or a pipeline or a barge, the rule does not apply to you. If you are non-transportation related facility, or otherwise a fixed facility that stores, processes, refines, transfers, distributes oil in bulk quantities, and you could be reasonably expected to discharge oil into the navigable water, then the rule does apply to you. These are some examples of non-transportation non-transportation related facilities. The biggest category, the one that we work with primarily, is the third category in red: industrial, commercial, agricultural, or public facilities that use, process, or store oil. What is an oil? It can be any kind of a petroleum-based product, crude oil, refined fuels, lubricants. It could be oil refuge, used oils, oil mixes, oil water mixes. It can be fats or oils or greases of animal origin or marine origin, or it can be vegetable or seed oils like soy oil or corn oil, and any kind of synthetic or mineral oil. So it's a pretty broad category. What's considered bulk? Anything that's in a container 55 gallons or larger is considered a bulk oil storage container. So when we're looking at the SPCC plan thresholds, we don't count anything that's in a container smaller than 55 gallons. If it's a 30-gallon drum, 5-gallon pail, quart bottles, we don't consider those. Those are not bulk oil storage containers, so we don't add those into the combined total. What's the threshold? The threshold's pretty low, really, 1,320 gallons. And this is aggregated capacity. It's not actual oil you may have on hand. So, for example, if you have a 2,000-gallon fuel tank, but you never put over 500 gallons in it, doesn't matter. It's considered a 2,000-gallon capacity, and that's really what we're looking at. So if your facility has over 1,320 gallons of combined capacity, of oil storage capacity, then you fall under the SPCC rule. Now there are some caveats to that. If your combined capacity is less than 10,000 gallons and you haven't had any single discharge over 1,000 gallons or two or more discharges over 42 gallons in the prior 3 years, then you are eligible to self-certify your SPCC plan. Now, we don't have very many clients that do self-certify. It's kind of like doing your taxes. You usually hire someone to do it for you just because it's not your core competency. And so we have very few clients, even if they do have under 10,000 gallons, that write and certify their own plan. If a facility has over 10,000 gallons, then you must have a PE certified. To that question, reasonably discharge into navigable waters, this is kind of a contentious point. And so when you read through the regulations, these are some of the terms that EPA has. This is actually EPA's own language. You must consider locations in regards to streams, ponds, ditches, storm or sanitary sewers, wetlands, mudflats, perennial or intermittent flowing water. So anything basically, we call it, use the toothpick rule, anything that can float a toothpick. The EPA is probably going to consider it a navigable water, even if it's a man-made feature like a drainage ditch. The one reason why such a low level of, you might say, a low threshold is because they get very excited about oil pollution. They estimate, the EPA does, that 1 gallon of oil can contaminate up to 1 million gallons of drinking water. So what type of facilities are we looking at that need an SPCC plan? Well, a great number of our clients are bulk fuel facilities where they have bulk fuel distribution. So those are definitely going to fall into the SPCC plan, and they're definitely going to be on the larger side, above 10,000 gallons, and require PE certification. By the way, if you're not familiar with PE, it's professional engineer. Service stations with above ground storage tanks. Now, if a service station has underground storage tanks and no above ground, then they would not fall under the SPCC rule. If they have both, again, we go back to that 1,320 gallon threshold. If they have over 1,320 gallons of bulk oil storage capacity, then they would fall under the SPCC rule. Service stations with underground tanks will fall under state underground storage tank rules. However, they would not fall under the SPCC rule. The SPCC rule is a federal rule that cannot be, the jurisdiction is federal only. It cannot be passed down to the states to enforce. It's one of the few rules that are like that. Airports and aviation, we do have quite a few clients that are refueling aircraft, and a great number of those tanks are above ground and fairly large, so they do fall under the rule. Animal feed production facilities, feed mills with animal fats or vegetable oil tanks. Again, animal fats and vegetable oils are considered oils, even though they may be edible or maybe not as hazardous to the environment. They still fall under the SPCC rule. Equipment dealers with a great deal of lube oil, bulk lube oils, or used oils on hand will be another category. We have a significant number of equipment dealers that we write SPCC plans for. Automotive as well as equipment too, could be a car dealership as well. Grain terminals with mineral oil used for dust suppression. Again, large terminals will have may have a significant quantity of mineral oil on hand. Any kind of a business that has a fleet fuel tanks, above ground tanks, or storage. So really it can apply to just about anybody. Hospitals, schools, truck terminals, salvage yards. It's really a very broad regulatory community. We're not going to delve into the nuts and bolts of an SPCC plan and specific requirements today. We will follow up with other webinars addressing certain aspects of SPCC rules. But today we're kind of taking a 30,000-foot approach. Again, it's an introductory webinar. But we do want to talk about some of the changes in enforcement with the EPA. And in the past 10 years, we've seen the citations and the go up, and they become a lot more forceful or picky in their, in their inspections. And it's really because of three main reasons. One, enforcement; two, guidance; and three, consensus and industry standards. Over the past 5-6 years now, the enforcement policy with the EPA has changed. The Obama administration had basically sent out an edict to enforce regulations more vigorously, and this is not just the EPA; it's to all jurisdictions, the Department of Transportation, Department of Labor. It wasn't just the EPA, but we really met a lot more scrutiny whenever we did have an inspection with a client. They scrutinized our plans more heavily. We really had some absurd findings with some of these inspections, and I give the example of one of the findings was that hey, we had a client that had an oil storage facility for drums of lube oil. The facility was basically a building that the floor was sloped, and it was a containment structure. There was no drains in the building. The building was full of 55-gallon drums. The EPA inspector looked at one of the drums that was sitting close to a walk-in door and said, you know, somebody could knock that drum over and it would spill outside the door, you know, if the door had been open. And so those are some of the just obscure kinds of citations that we've seen in the past 5 years. Also, they've become a lot more rigid and uncooperative when it comes to findings like that. Trying to get those findings removed from the inspection report before it goes to the enforcement people has become very difficult. And they a lot of times will not help you as to what is acceptable. We've had to rewrite plans 2 and 3 times, and then just to have them kick back and say, no, this does not comport with the rule. And that's about the extent of the answer that we get. So it's kind of like a guessing game sometimes. We're trying to hit a moving target in the dark. Mute your mic. Get feedback. I'm sorry, we had a little feedback here on this end. We had to adjust some equipment. Another thing is that the fines have increased over the past few years as well. And they play this nice little game where the inspector says, hey, I'm only here, I'm the eyes of the agency. You know, I don't issue fines. That's enforcement. All I do is, you know, I write up my report. And then you talk to enforcement people and they say, hey, we only know what the inspector tells us. You know, we can't take anything off the report. Yeah, the inspector was the one that wrote it up. They were there. So you get in this little endless circle of going back and forth where they're both pointing the finger at each other that, you know, I'm sorry, we can't do anything to try to get one of these absurd findings taken off of an inspection report. Okay, we did get a question from someone out there, and I want to kind of address it before we go any further. I'll just read the question we have a grain site that uses mineral oil, but it's only on site during harvest, less than 90 days. Would we need a plan? Make sure I read the whole question. Okay, so if you have a facility and you only have oil there temporarily or for 90 days or a month, even out of the year, it really doesn't matter. Again, they're going by the oil storage capacity. So you apparently have a container on site that you're putting mineral oil in, or maybe it's a portable container you move in, or and then you remove later. It still doesn't matter. It's if you're over the threshold and it's on site, you basically fall under the SPCC rule. Now, with that said, your chances of being inspected and actually caught with the container on site and without a plan, do go down. You're less likely, to have enforcement action against you. You're going to be a little more under the radar than most, but yes, it doesn't matter if it's temporary or not. You still fall under the rule. Portable containers fall under the rule just as well as fixed containers. The only difference is if that portable container was, let's say, a transport or a tanker or something like that, and it was licensed to go out on the highway or public roads, and it was still connected to motive power or to the tractor trailer truck. That's the only thing that might get you out of it would be a non-transportation related facility at that point. But if you disconnect motive power and you've got the trailer parked there and you're using oil out of the trailer, then it does fall under the rule. Okay, we did have one other question real quick. Do tanks more than 1,320 gallons inside a facility require an SPCC? Yes. 1,320 gallons is the threshold. We added up everything that's in a 55-gallon drum or larger, and we aggregate everything in the 55-gallon drums or larger. So if you have a tank that's 2,000 gallons and then you have a half a dozen 55-gallon drums, we would add everything up, and that would be your oil storage capacity, your bulk oil storage capacity. Another thing that has evolved with the EPA are guidance documents, and they've written 2 guidance documents since the rule was first implemented in '74. The actual rule itself is not very long. The original rule was only 12 pages long. But in 2005, they wrote their first guidance document, and this guidance document was for their inspectors. The first one, was 520 pages, and it told the inspectors how to enforce the law, basically. In 2013, they revised that guidance document, and now it's 921 pages long. The problem we have with the guidance document is that there's a lot of decision making done in that guidance document, and the inspectors are now enforcing the guidance document as if it were law. And the problem we have is that it is not law. that it is guidance, and if you have any kind of a disagreement or issues with the guidance documents, they, again, they're not bending, they won't work with us any longer to apply any kind of common sense to the situation, if you will. But they basically, the guidance docket has become administrative fiat, and it greatly expands the requirements of the rules. They mysteriously, what I call mysteriously, filled in the blanks, or it reveals implied intent that was never spelled out in the rule or the preamble to the rule. And we feel like this is one of the biggest areas of abuse by EPA right now. And it's, again, it's very difficult to go back and get fines and citations taken off. They just will not work with us anymore, even if they are clearly in the wrong. And their answer is basically, well, you can appeal our findings. Well, the problem we have is that we have a client that may get $2,000 or $3,000 worth of fines, and to appeal that, they'd probably have to spend 10 or 20 times that amount in legal fees. So nobody wants to do that. And the problem is that every time the EPA comes up with another one of these absurd violations, nobody fights it. It just sets a precedent for the next person and the next one after that. One of the, I'll give you an example of one way that they've expanded the rule, and this has to do a lot with any facility, really, but a lot of our bulk fuel, a lot of our petroleum marketers who have bulk fuel plants, the guidance document says that filling a tank off of a transport is no longer a one-person operation, unless you have high-level alarms and shut-offs and automations and that will shut the system down and keep it from overflowing. It's no longer good enough that a truck driver can go back and read the tank gauge, you know, figure out how many gallons of capacity they have, and not pump any more into it than that. No, now you're supposed to have two people there, one to watch the gauge and one at the truck to shut it down in case you start to overfill the tank. That's just one example of how they've taken this mysterious intent out of the guidance document to kind of fill in voids, if you will, in the rule. The third thing that is has greatly increased the you might say the complexity of writing SPCC plans are consensus documents, industry standards. There's two main industry standards right now, but there's nothing that stops the EPA from going out and using other standards in other industries. But the two that they are citing right now is the Steel Tank Institute's STI SP001 standard, which is primarily a standard for shop fabricated steel tanks used in flammable and combustible material storage. So your fuel tanks. And so any kind of a fuel tank that's UL fuel tank that's manufactured by a tank manufacturer that's basically designed for fuel storage is going to fall under this Steel Tank Institute standard. The American Petroleum Standard API 653, it's geared more towards very large field erected tanks, ones that are you see at like terminals. that maybe are millions of gallons in size, and they're constructed on site. However, there's nothing to stop the EPA from going out and if somebody writes a standard on a plastic or poly tank or any kind of other storage tank that might be used to store oil in, they could just as well go out and grab those standards and use the requirements to that standard and basically incorporate those into the SPCC law. So they've done what we call horizontal regulations, where they've gone out and grabbed these different industry standards and basically have made them the rule of law, even though the original SPCC rule and preamble specifically said that there were no external rules referenced. So in other words, they specifically didn't go out and reference these rules by name, but that's what our inspectors are doing right now. Some of the violations that we see, and we call these the top 10 violations. We really don't know if they're the top 10, but they're ones we see a lot. And a lot of them are very simple. The plan wasn't certified. Somebody reprinted the plan, but it didn't have a PE signature, or it didn't have the manager's approval or signature in it somewhere. That's a common violation. The plan was not on site. Maybe it was, at a different location, but it wasn't at the site where the storage tanks are. There's no 5-year review. There's a requirement that every 5 years, at least every 5 years, you have to review your plan and certify it again. So a review is basically just going back and making sure everything is still accurate and up to date, and that there's nothing that needs to be changed. Or if there is, then you make those changes. Number 5, no amendments. If a plan is changed, you are supposed to list what the amendments were, when the amendments were made, and that is a section in the SPCC plan. The amendments may have to be certified by PE depending on what they are. If there's any change in storage tanks capacity, or your capacity to pollute, then anything having to do with that has to be recertified. Plans don't follow the sequence of the rule. And again, they're very picky on this. They want the SPCC plan to follow the sequence of the rule. We do this as much as possible. However, there are places in the plan where it doesn't make sense to follow the sequence of the rule, or we would be repeating information over again. So anywhere where we don't follow the sequence of the rule, we have a reference or a cross-reference. No facility diagram. That's a part of the rule. They're getting pretty particular about their facility diagrams. A lot of times, if we can, we'll use aerial or satellite photos, but we'll drop the facility and identify all the storage containers, what's falls under the SPCC rule, how the surface water of the facility, which direction it flows. There's a lot of information that can be put on a facility diagram. Yeah, no procedures for reporting a discharge. We'll have a procedure in there for what to do if you do have a spill. The last one, number 10, is one I will probably be the focus of future webinars. Equipment inspections. This is one that gets most of the regulated facilities that we've been involved with, and that is that equipment inspections are required to be conducted on a monthly basis. In addition to that, there may be some testing required of the storage containers, and they have to be done in accordance with the industry standards I spoke of earlier, the Steel Tank Institute standard, or the API standard. But anyway, a lot of facilities really fall down in this area where they don't have records or monthly records of inspections that they do. So this is one area where we really work with clients to try to ensure that they're conducting those inspections monthly, and they're inspecting all the equipment and testing the gauges and whatnot, doing everything they need to be doing to comply with the rule. Now, the problem is, even though this is listed as a violation, it's actually many more. And I'll give you an example. We've had one client that was cited 9 times for the same violation. In other words, they weren't conducting their monthly equipment inspections. So they were cited for not inspecting equipment in accordance with the written procedure that's in the SPCC plan. They were cited for not having records of the inspections that they did not conduct. They were cited for not signing the records of inspections that they did not conduct. They were cited for not maintaining the records of the inspections that they did not conduct for 3 years. You have to maintain at least 3 years records of monthly inspections. They were cited for not subjecting visual inspections of the above ground tanks or integrity testing of the above ground tanks, which, by the way, might be a visual inspection. So anyway, they ended up with 9 different citations just off of that one topic. So what looks like one violation is actually ends up being a lot more, and this one violation may end up costing you $2,000 and $3,000 easily. Now, what do we do to address some of the issues I just mentioned? DEKRA Inside, our solution is we write an SPCC plan online, and we put it in your policy manual. Now, for those of you familiar with our online applications, one of them is a policy manual. And the way I think of the policy manual, it's like all your 3-ring binders you have on your shelf behind your desk there in the cloud. Anything that you can write in a policy and put in a 3-ring binder, you can put in our policy manual. So one of our policies is an SPCC plan. The nice thing about our policy is that we write it, and then we have what we call data forms where we fill in the specific information. The policy follows the regulations. So it's in the same order as the regulations are. It's very easy to update. We can update the information using the data forms that we build to pour the information, the site-specific information into the policy. So if we need names, numbers, descriptions, a list of your storage containers, sizes, all that information is put into the policy, into the SPCC policy through data forms that we built. The policy manual automatically versions itself. So anytime you update the policy, it keeps the old version as well as the new version. We can put a lot of links and attachments into those. SPCC plan online. So if there's external documents, if there's checklists or forms you may need, we can attach them or put a link in there. So all you got to do is click on the word, you know, inspection checklist, and it will bring up the inspection checklist. We store records in the online policy, and it's easy to manage multiple locations. So if your facility has multiple, or your company has multiple locations, and you need SPCC plans at more than one, it's very easy to go in and build the plan for one, and then the other, and manage all that information. This is kind of what the SPCC plan looks like in our policy manual, our online policy manual. There's 4 sections. And again, the sections follow the way the rule is. So it's very easy for an inspector to go through the SPCC program and you know, audit or inspect the written document as well as your facility. Oh, we have one question I want to loop back to. The question is, I thought at one time there was a proposal to eliminate the 1,320 gallon requirement and just start compliance at 10,000 gallons. That proposal, I believe, was submitted by, was it Farm Bureau, I believe. And this actually came about when farmers discovered that they fell under the SPCC rule, and there was quite a bit of pushback from ag organizations like Farm Bureau, and that was a proposal that they did try to get to get passed. But what the EPA did is, I believe, is that the threshold for farmers? I believe that 10,000 gallons is the threshold for farmers, but not for businesses, not for agribusinesses or any other type of business, just strictly farmers. And we don't have too many farm clients, so if you want to address that in more depth, we can go into that in more depth. But what constitutes a farmer? There's quite a few letters of determination there as to what a farm is, how they define a farm. That's probably going to be a topic for discussion at another time, but again, that is the threshold for farmers, but not for businesses. Okay, back to our policy manual. So we start with the policy manual. Now, even though the manual's online, we still print out paper plans, and that's what we certify, our paper plans. When we certify a plan and send it to a client, we also send a cover letter with it. And in that cover letter, this is one way that we communicate and try to make you aware of things. But in that cover letter, we're going to address things like any deficiencies in their program. A deficiency might be lack of secondary containment for a storage tank. It may be some other topic. But anyway, we also address what we changed with the plan. If we amended the plan, and this is a recertification of a plan, we'll list what was updated. But this is our way of communicating with the client whenever a plan is issued initially, or whenever a plan is updated or recertified. We'll also flag any page that needs to be signed by the client. And there are typically at least two and three different places where an authorized representative of a company needs to sign this document. Another way we try to interact or try to make the client's life a little easier and help them stay compliant with these requirements is in DEKRA Insights web apps, we have an alert system where we can set up alerts to email the client whenever it's time to do something. So, for example, this particular account, we've got 3 alerts set up for this client. The first one is a 5-year review, just to remind them every 5 years we need to go through and review your plan and make sure it's up to date, and then actually log that review right in the plan. That's all done in the policy manual after the alert goes out. Number 2, a monthly inspection. We have alerts going out to them monthly. The alert actually has the inspection checklist attached to it. So when they get the alert, all they have to do is click on the link, pull up the checklist, print it off, go out and do their inspection. Or if they have their checklist on an electronic device like an iPad or something, they can go do the inspection and do it all electronically. But anyway, it's just a reminder to make sure they're doing what they need to be doing. The third one is an annual reminder to conduct refresher training with their oil handling people. Again, another requirement of the SPCC rule. Need to conduct annual refresher training. This is an often overlooked item that doesn't get done. So we set up an alert to remind the client. It doesn't have to be anything real sophisticated either. The training basically boils down to reviewing the SPCC plan. What's your protocol for preventing oil spills, or if you do have a discharge, what do you do? It's just that simple, but it has to be done and it has to be documented. We do have some what we call incident reports built into the online apps, where if you do have an incident, let's say a spill, there is a spill reporting form in there to help you collect all the information you may need to collect in the process of reporting a spill. So these are just some of the tools we build in to our SPCC program. In order to help with the training, the refresher training, we do have an SPCC trainer's guide or training guide with us, with a PowerPoint slideshow and then a short quiz, so that you can conduct your training, your annual training. Let the employees take the quiz. You'll have a document and training that also shows comprehension, that the employee understood the material. So it's a good way to document that training requirement. We have some clients that are using our preventative maintenance program to actually incorporate these monthly inspections into their routine preventative maintenance program for a facility. They may incorporate the SPCC inspections with other inspections. And a good example is we have a client that has a grain terminal. Every month they go through and they do inspections on that grain terminal, inspections of the grain handling equipment, fire extinguishers, safety equipment, whatnot. They just incorporated their SPCC into that same monthly inspection, to inspect the mineral oil tanks and the dike and the oil handling equipment. So basically, they just incorporated that into their preventative maintenance program. So that's something that's also available. That was really all we had for today. We wanted to keep this fairly brief, fairly short, give you an overview of kind of an idea of what the SPCC rule is all about, how the EPA is enforcing it, and then some of the ways that we have to kind of make compliance a little more effective and efficient. If you have any specific questions you want to send us, please do so. If you want to get a hold of us, please jot down our phone numbers or email addresses. Feel free to send us an email if you have specific situation that you would like some answers on, what your options are, what you may need to do. Again, that's just like the question earlier about only having oil on site for so many days. It really doesn't matter. You're still required to have an SPCC plan. It's a little different than a lot of rules. Like I know a lot of the bulk chemical rules, if you only have chemicals on site for less than 30 days, you don't have to abide by all the secondary containment requirements for bulk chemicals or fertilizers. This rule is a little different than those. So feel free to drop Rob or I a line with questions. Is there anything else that you wanted to add, Rob? If there's no other questions, we appreciate your attendance. And again, we'll come out with follow-up webinars. We'll get a little more specific into the details of the rules. We'll cover certain areas such as secondary containment or what testing mechanical integrity requirements there are for storage tanks, what they look like. We'll probably come out with those in we'll try to do a webinar about once every quarter if we can, and to keep everyone informed on this topic. So appreciate your attendance. Everyone have a good day. Signing off for Rob and Joy here, or George and Brad, aka we'll talk to you later. Thank you.